Hello and welcome to this edition of Tennessee Stories of Home. My name is Charles Priest and we're here today at an old log cabin off of Shelbyville Road called Cardinal Bluff, and this is my home. I grew up in this house. I graduated from high school in 1988, and from that point on I followed my musical career that took me to New Orleans, Louisville, Kentucky, most recently as a college music professor in Virginia. But after 30 years of being gone, I've had the chance to come back home and come back to this same patch of land that I grew up on. The Barren Fork River is just down here that I grew up fishing in, trying to run a trap line. I hunted all these woods and these fields. Before there was a subdivision here, it was all farms. But I grew up on this land and I know just about every tree that's out here. When I was little, my mother and I went out to dig ferns because she collected wildflowers and would transplant them up here around the cabin. And we went down to the river one day to get some ferns, and she told me, "Don't move." My whole family knows the word freeze, don't move, what that means. And there was a cottonmouth coiled up in front of us. Its mouth was open, ready to strike. You could see clearly the white cottony inside, pink and white color of its mouth. And she put her shovel blade in front of my ankles. Well, that mantle is actually a stone bench. The stone bench was in an apple orchard on Cardwell Mountain. I don't know the location of it, and I don't know how it got to this location. But you can, if you look closely, you can see the legs for the bench. There's more to our identity than our DNA. It's not just our genealogy that makes us who we are. It's not just the environment we grew up in, but it's the land we walked on as children, as parents. My daughter, when she was little, played in these leaves with my mother, her granny, holding her hand. And that's important to me. Other people have homes where the very dirt itself is part of what they remember growing up, where they know this is the tree that it has swing on. This is the pile of firewood that we use. This is the well we got water out of. This was the field my grandpa had cows in, things like that. The land makes us who we are as much as anything.
Community TVTN is brought to you by Security Federal Savings Bank, proudly serving the community we call home.
High-quality leads with prolific internet marketing and invigorating web design services that will energize your business. We are SiriusSEM. Call today or visit us at SiriusSEM.com.
Welcome to another edition of Community Insider. Join us as we travel Middle Tennessee, uncovering history and experiencing the adventure of unique stories and events coming to you inside your community.
This highway leads me back to town. I've been too long on this road. Maybe this time I'll come back home to stay. I wonder why I ever roamed from people that walk like me and talk like me. County fairs and a marching band. Now that I've come back home, I'll never roam again. I've found my place to stand. I'll take any road that gets
I grew up in this house. I graduated from high school in 1988, and from that point on I followed my musical career that took me to New Orleans, Louisville, Kentucky, most recently as a college music professor in Virginia. But after 30 years of being gone, I've had the chance to come back home and come back to this same patch of land that I grew up on. The Barren Fork River is just down here that I grew up fishing in, trying to run a trap line. I hunted all these woods and these fields. Before there was a subdivision here, it was all farms. But I grew up on this land, and I know just about every tree that's out here. This original log cabin was near the present-day location of Crisp Springs Market. There was a resort there during the 1800s associated with the different mineral springs in the area. And we're not sure of the exact history of the cabin, but we believe it was the post office for that location, or possibly the house for the person that kept the bridge over the Barren Fork River there. Later on, it was moved to this location on the river bluff by the Tittle family that owned this farm. And in the 1950s, my dad, Emmett Priest, bought this land and bought this cabin. And this is the house that he and my mother moved into when they were married. And this is the house that I grew up in. It's hand-hewn logs made of trees from the land around here. The chimney and all the stone in the fireplace actually comes from Cardwell Mountain. The mantle was a stone bench in an apple orchard up there. And within these stones, there are actually fossils. There are fish fins and seashells that you can see inside the fireplace stones themselves. And all of that came to this property. And while I can't live in it now, my hope is to return to this land and build my own cabin here, hopefully using some of the same logs. This old cabin it was originally a one-room cabin. You can see there's a small addition onto the side, but it has a loft in it still to this day. You can see the end logs over the window right there that support the loft. That was my parents' bedroom when they were first married. What was the back porch at the time was walled in, and that became the kitchen on one end and my bedroom on the other end. You can see these axe marks on the logs still inside the house, but because it's collapsing, it's not safe to go inside it anymore. And then the modern addition was built in the early 70s on the back end, but most of our life is in this log cabin at the front part right here. In the wintertime, even when it was in good shape, if there was a strong wind outside, there was a light breeze in the living room, which to me was perfectly normal. We didn't have central heat or air conditioning. I did not encounter air conditioning on a regular basis till I was in college. I didn't know what it was like. But the fan sometimes worked, sometimes didn't. That meant it was quiet at night. You didn't have this roaring sound, which also means you could hear animals walking by in the leaves at night, which was a little scary for a little kid until Christmas around 1982 when I got a shotgun and I wasn't scared anymore of what was walking around outside. Sometimes the cows would get out from the Walker's farm over here and I'd look out of bed on a Saturday morning and there'd be a cow staring in the window at me. The heat, we had a couple of space heaters we could plug up in this part of the cabin that sort of worked, sort of didn't, but the best source of heat was the fireplace. And guess whose job it was to go get firewood? There's even remains of the last firewood pile still over there, almost rotted at this point, but I'm the one that stacked it up and I would come out to get the firewood. And then at Christmas time, we would go out on what is now some very nice homes, but at the time was Mr. Hargis's farm. And we would go back there and cut a Christmas tree and drag it through the snow, put it up dangerously close to the fireplace. But then we would always save a big piece of cedar log, if I could find cedar, on Christmas morning, the first thing I did before we opened presents is we build a fire, put that cedar on it, and that cedar would catch fire really fast and flame up, and we'd have some warmth and some pleasing fireplace light while we open presents every Christmas morning. My parents are Emmett and Cheryl Priest. My dad passed away a number of years ago. Emmett taught out at what was then the Vocational Technical School, or the VOTEC, and is now the Tennessee College of Applied Technology, and that's where I work now. My mother, Cheryl Priest, was the librarian at the Magnus Memorial Library. So I grew up after school every day going to the library, and I just learned to read books as a part of that. So my whole family are literary people. We like to read. My mother's family are Davenports and came out of Cannon County. My Priest family came from Wales originally, a couple hundred years ago or more, and eventually migrated their way down to the area around Bon Air Mountain and worked in the coal mines. Then Thomas Franklin Priest got married and got fired by the company, and they moved to McMinnville, and that's how my Priest family wound up here. They bought this property, and this is where they lived their whole lives. Due to the condition of this house now, my mother lives in town, and my wife and I live with her, right, ironically still along the Barren Fork River, but just closer to town now. Well, this is the main part of the cabin right here, and you can see the axe marks on the walls where it was hand-hewn square. And it was essentially a one-room cabin at the time. And this was our main source of heat. And this was the back corner of the cabin. This was the back wall of it. The next portion that you see that's collapsed in on itself was originally the back porch, and it was walled in, and one end was the kitchen, and this end at one point was a dining room, but it was originally my bedroom. And then the rest of the house was a modern addition that we had built, so that we had a new bathroom, master bedroom, my bedroom, and a hallway that was done like a greenhouse, because my mother liked wildflowers and plants, and she transplanted a lot of those things around this house. It's just not livable anymore, and we're going to make it go away. This was my bedroom right here. It's the one that has the old KDF sticker on the window up there. But that's where I lived. And at the time, there were no houses out here other than us and the Walkers on down the road. So you could hear everything. You learned to recognize the sound of every bird, of a possum walking by in the dark, anything. The flip side of that is you could also hear a snake slither across the floor in the night, because every summer we would have multiple snakes come in this house, and not little ones either. Big suckers that you'd have to kill with a machete. My mother informed me I'm not allowed to shoot them in the house, because I tried one time. But we had so many snakes, and if it was dark and you heard something hit the floor and slide, you knew what it was. And it made for a very long night of no sleep. And we're built right here on the river bluff. Now the biggest entertainment is watching kayakers come down the river. But we have wildlife all over the place out here. Ducks, deer, coyotes. There were coyote tracks in the snow this morning.
This is more of those stones.
Yeah, these are more of the stones that ultimately would have come from the land around here. Some came from Cardwell Mountain. Others came from other parts of the land around here. And we had a big deck out here at one point where we could just sit out and watch the river go by. And we have a path that goes down to the river. There's a spring that comes out down there. And as soon as the snow melts, I'll go fishing down there. but I have to clear it out while the snow is on the ground so I don't get snake bit, because otherwise you can't walk down there. Cottonmouth. When I was little, my mother and I went out to dig ferns because she collected wildflowers and would transplant them up here around the cabin. And we went down to the river one day to get some ferns, and she told me, don't move. My whole family knows the word freeze, don't move, what that means. And there was a cottonmouth coiled up in front of us. Its mouth was open, ready to strike. You could see clearly the white cottony inside, pink and white color of its mouth. And she put her shovel blade in front of my ankles to protect me. And she said, don't move. And by the time she got to the second word, we were racing each other back up the river. My dad and another man were chased by a copperhead one time back up the trail. So these days, I'm not too fond of snakes. You can see this is where some of the old wall collapsed in, but can you see that mantle in there? That's the old bench. Well, that mantle is actually a stone bench. The stone bench was in an apple orchard on Cardwell Mountain. I don't know the location of it, and I don't know how it got to this location. But if you look closely, you can see the legs for the bench, and they are mounted into the fireplace itself. And then the stone bench sits on top of that. They used it for cutting apples. And in the face of that mantle right there, if you look up closely, it's full of fossils, seashells. And you can't see it from here, but down on the right-hand side, there's actually a fish fin in one of the stones. Growing up, we had well water out here. It was not the kind where you dipped a bucket down in it or you could fall down in it to get water. But it was drilled. There's a natural spring down here at the river that still runs to this day. And that was the pump for our well water. Unfortunately, something happened to it once upon a time. My dad was in the hospital for a few months, very ill. And a lot of his co-workers from out at the Votech came out and helped us get water back. Otherwise, we would not have had water out here. I'm from here. I'm a Tennessean. My wife is from the Bahamas, a small island about 50 miles northeast of Nassau. She's been with me for 30 years. We started dating when we were students at Bryan College. And she's been with me so long, her family says she has a southern accent. But that's not a bad thing, that's okay. We have one daughter, Katie, who lives up in Johnson City, Tennessee. When she graduated from college, she had a job opening available and needed a place to live quick. And the only place we could find is someone said, I have a small log cabin she could live in. So in a grand circle of things, my daughter finished college and moved into a log cabin. And that feels right. It's poetic, I guess. As a musician, I've had a varied background. I'm a composer. I've written orchestral music, church choir music, brass ensemble music, but I'm also a songwriter. My heart music is country music because I grew up listening to that. These are people that sing about things that are important to me and talk like I do. So I feel fulfilled when I hear that. I still listen to other kinds of music, from Gregorian chant to Mozart, but country music is what moves my heart more than anything. So I write songs. I try to tell stories. I have one about living in the shadow of Ben Lomond Mountain. My songs mention the Barren Fork River. They talk about this very place. They talk about the county line coming out of Sparta, past Rock Island, coming back home to Warren County. When I was in college, every time I came home driving my truck, as soon as I hit the county line, I would honk the horn as a little celebration of coming home. And when we came down with the moving van back in May, I did that again. just very loudly this time, because that was the last time I was leaving, or it was the last time I was coming home permanently. We're here now permanently. Once we build a house out here, I will never leave this property. This is my home. We've got 4 acres on this river, and I wish I had more space around me, but now we've got neighbors, and that's okay. There's more to our identity than our DNA. It's not just our genealogy that makes us who we are. It's not just the environment we grew up in, but it's the land we walked on as children, as parents. My daughter, when she was little, played in these leaves with my mother, her granny, holding her hand. And that's important to me. Other people have homes where the very dirt itself is part of what they remember growing up, where they know this is the tree that I have swing on. This is the pile of firewood that we use. This is the well we got water out of. This was the field my grandpa had cows in, things like that. The land makes us who we are as much as anything. I'm Charles Priest. Thank you for being a part of this episode of Tennessee Stories of Home. You got to hear the story of my home. Remember, every house has a story. Every home has a life. What's your story?